Thanks, George. Appreciate it. Let's see. Thanks, everybody, for joining us this morning for our third day of workshop number 2. Let's see. Just going to move ahead real quick. I actually don't have a very insightful safety message. I'll just remind everybody to buckle up. We've got Thanksgiving coming ahead. I'm sure many of you will be traveling, and just want to make sure that everybody's going to be safe on the road, and also to remind everybody that turkey can cause drowsiness. So please be safe while you're traveling next week, if you are traveling. And I think other than that, I'm going to go ahead and jump us into at least some general discussion, or sorry, general guidelines for the meeting. So just a note that the meeting is going to be recorded. One or more decision makers may be present during the meeting, but no decisions will be taken. And then let's go ahead. I think we've got critical mass to do a quick roll call. So can public advocates let us know if somebody's attending?
Yes, we are here.
Thanks, Anna. Anyone from Energy Producers and Users Coalition and indicated shippers?
Yes, Eddie, this is Jim Mosier here, and I anticipate that Michael Gorman and Colin Fitzhenry will be joining.
Okay, great, thanks. And anyone from Semper Companies?
Good morning, Eddie. We're on the call. Thank you.
Okay, great. Anyone from the Utility Reform Network?
Yes, good morning, Eddie. This is Tom Long with TURN, and I'm joined by Chuck Feinstein, the consultant for TURN.
Thank you. Anyone from Mussy Grade Road Alliance? Okay, Dr. Mitchell might not be able to join us this morning. As safety, Southern California Edison.
Good morning, Eddie, and good morning, parties. This is Chris Vias with Edison. I'm joined by Brian Landry. We may have one or two others from SCE joining as well during the workshop. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Pacific Gas and Electric.
Good morning, Eddie. This is Vincent Lowe, representatives of PG&E Operator.
Great, thanks, Vincent. And then I'll just try one more time. Protect Our Communities Foundation or the Utility Consumers Action Network. And is Matthew here? Yeah, Matthew Allison.
I'm here. Good morning.
Great. Yeah, from Level 4, thank you. And then anyone else that would like to be recognized, you can either speak up real quick, or you're welcome to enter your name and your association in the chat. So the agenda, again, is going to be relatively fixed today. What we're going to start off with is a presentation on linear programming that's related to simple optimization. And I seem to remember that Dr. Feinstein actually had some specific questions to this. So when we start off the discussion this morning, I think that's where we'll start, is having him maybe ask those questions one more time, and maybe we could go through them. I will admit that I may defer to Matthew for many of those questions, and so I'll have him online for any parts that I may not be able to discuss as coherently as he can. But I'll start off by just running through some slides, and then we can run through some Q&A directly after that. I think this section, it can be technical, and we'll try to get through some of those technical pieces by about 10:50. And then I'd like to, after the break, leave about an hour and a half approximately for general discussion. And I know we've had a lot of technical discussion already this week. I actually have kind of a procedural question at the beginning of that we'll try to work through a little bit. Something that was kind of discussed yesterday, but I just want to make sure that I understood it clearly enough before we move forward. So that's kind of our general agenda, and then we're going to close out with some next steps and follow-ups at the end. So just some general attendee participation. IT related questions can be directed to George, and I would ask George if you could please post your email in the chat for everybody. And then, of course, attendees still have the ability to mute and unmute themselves, but we would ask that everybody stay muted except during the Q&A period. During the presentation, if you could enter your questions into the chat, that would be great. And please address those questions to everyone so that we all have the chance to see them. And then I would appreciate it if we just kind of hold off on clarifying questions or even non-clarifying questions till after the presentation is finished, and we'll have plenty of time for discussion today. But if there's some questions that are left over in the chat box during the workshop, SPD will do our best to collect those questions and circulate them to the service list. And if there was some questions that didn't get answered yesterday, could you maybe repost or maybe highlight that to me during the general discussion? If we have time, we could try to discuss them today. And if we don't, then I'll be sure to. Yes, the recording is on, as far as I know. Thanks, Tom. I can see it in my viewer. Does anybody else not see the recording? Okay.
I see it now, Eddie. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, and then last point is just that after you're done asking your question, just remember that WebEx doesn't necessarily lower the hand for you after you stop speaking. So please remember to lower your hand, so that way we kind of can understand the order of who's asking questions. Great. So for this simple optimization introduction, we're going to start off with this slide. There are potentially many ways to optimize portfolios and the portfolio approach that we discussed just yesterday. And the approach that's presented in the staff proposal is to use linear programming to find an efficient frontier and then consider various trade-offs. The ultimate goal is to maximize the reduction of overall residual risk within the constraint of a specific budget. And we may also want to consider a BCR threshold, such as a BCR greater than 1. So let's walk through some examples using visualization. And let's assume out of 100 or more hypothetical mitigation portfolios, there are a handful that achieve a maximum level of risk reduction for a given budget constraint. And then the rest are just suboptimal. And that's what you would see with these orange X marks here. Whereas on the efficient frontier, these are the portfolios that are at the maximum level of risk reduction given a specific portfolio cost. And here we see at the $50 portfolio budget in these figures that the optimal portfolio for average risk is portfolio 7. But for tail average risk, the optimal portfolio would be portfolio 5. So which portfolio should be selected? And that depends on risk tolerance. Some parties who are more risk averse may prefer the greater reduction of tail risk in portfolio 5 because it is more likely to mitigate catastrophic events. Other parties may feel that portfolio 7 is a better approach because it is more likely to mitigate common events that are less risky. And now that we have risk tolerance thresholds, or now that we will be discussing risk tolerance thresholds in the RDF and in a RAMP application, this portfolio approach then opens room for deliberation between parties over which is more important to address, average risk or tail risk. And there can be other considerations as well, and we'll explore that in the next set of slides. And this is just a general summary of that in text for folks that aren't in attendance and wanted to just look through the slide deck. And I'll do that for the next slide as well. So this visualization is called a herringbone diagram, and it allows us to look at 3 different budget scenarios. This time we are not looking at costs and benefits, but we are looking at the trade-off between reducing the safety consequence versus the reliability consequence. And the only way to achieve a higher level of safety consequence reduction other than portfolio 3 would be to jump to the budget range that's associated with portfolio 7, so on the green line here. Now, just staying with portfolio 3 for a minute, note that the other 2 portfolios on the red frontier trade off, slightly lower safety for higher reliability. And of course, we can demonstrate the same trade-offs for tail risk in the parallel diagram that you see there. We can see that for the moderate budget, portfolio 7 is is optimal for average risk, while portfolio 5 is optimal for tail risk. But there is also the point that portfolio 7 is better designed for reducing safety consequences, while portfolio 5 is going to emphasize reducing reliability consequences. So whether to select portfolio 7 or portfolio 5 will depend on the evaluator's risk tolerance, as well as their preference for addressing safety and reliability. And again, I just have this slide right here to summarize. And we can do this exercise for really large numbers of portfolios as well. Here we have highlighted portfolio 161 as an optimal portfolio at our chosen budget constraint of 585, right around here. And this portfolio reduces average risk by $646, and it reduces tail average risk by $2,621. And we'll come back to those numbers in just a moment. But in this diagram, we can see that portfolio 161 at the budget spend of $585 also tends to reduce more safety consequence than it does reliability consequence. And that's true, at least in this example, for both average risk and tail average risk. Now, if we were more concerned with reliability, we might want to explore a different portfolio. But if we do that, it is possible we will not be able to maximize overall residual risk to the same degree as portfolio 161. So again, this approach to optimization is all about opening up new spaces for parties to deliberate over what they value and why. But the budget constraint makes sure that these values do not ignore concerns over affordability. So now that we've found an optimal portfolio, this portfolio 161, let's consider how close it gets us to achieving our risk tolerance threshold. Our overall residual risk after implementing portfolio 161 is $718 for average risk and $2,095 for tail average. And if a party or the utility is risk neutral with regard to this particular risk, then the threshold is achieved and no further mitigations are necessary. And remember that a truly risk neutral party would not really care about tail risk, since every point on the constant risk exceedance curve is equal in their mind. But if a party is risk averse, then portfolio 161 has not yet reduced risk below the threshold set for either average risk or tail average risk. And we can take this one more step, because remember our budget was $585 and our mitigation benefit is $646. So the BCR is essentially about 1.11. And that means that there is still potentially, if our BCR threshold is 1, then that means there's still room for the budget to be expanded. And so we have an additional opportunity to deliberate over what is more important, affordability or achieving our risk thresholds, our risk reduction thresholds to our risk tolerance level. Okay, and this will be our final slide. I just want to emphasize that when it comes to optimization, and I think I mentioned this yesterday, that SPD is not currently taking a prescriptive approach. We are cognizant that a flexible approach may allow for innovative ways to optimize portfolios of mitigations, and we're happy to discuss that a little bit more today. But we feel strongly that linear programming can provide a good model, and hope the utilities will at least consider this approach and make sure not to make this overly complex. As long as the goal is to minimize overall residual risk until the utilities achieve risk tolerance threshold, then SPD is open to evaluating various approaches to optimization. Now, that said, it is important that an optimizing formula mustn't include a budget constraint to address affordability. As noted recently, affordability must be made a priority going forward, and SPD staff see optimization as our strongest means of doing that within the RDF context. And as parties become more familiar with the process of establishing exceedance curves, and as the Commission moves forward with the RDF and future proceedings, we can even consider ALARP as an approach for adding even more exceedance curves if necessary, and I think that we discussed that a bit yesterday. But for now, we feel that the current approach recommended in the staff proposal is an important step forward in the right direction, and we're looking forward to your guys' questions and feedback. And so I will start off there. I see that Brian has his hand up first, and I know that there's been some discussion within the chat, but I'll go ahead and let Brian. Actually, I mentioned that I would let Dr. Feinstein ask his question, but it seems like maybe he hasn't joined us yet. Is that right?
He's there.
No, I'm here.
Oh, I see. Sorry.
I thought
I'll
you,
defer.
I thought that you
Go
would, as part of your presentation, I thought that you would get to that. But if you would like, I can start off the discussion by reiterating my 3 questions.
Yeah, please do. That was kind of my hope, is that you would be able to reiterate those, and then we could kind of walk through them together. I think Matthew can also help me answer some of those questions.
As I understand it, then, you're saying that you solve a series of optimization problems to create the efficient frontier.
That's right.
Mike, and you mentioned that one of the methods you're thinking of using to find this efficient frontier is linear programming.
That's right.
Good. So then my 3 questions that I posed yesterday are, what's the objective function? What are the constraints? And what are the decision variables
Right.
in those
So
linear programs?
So optimizing on, risk reduction in order to achieve our risk tolerance threshold, our overall residual risk. And then the budget constraint is one of our primary constraints, although what we've also discussed is adding a BCR as a type of decision-making threshold that you could also consider. But if there's any other, constraints, Matthew, that you would like to, add to that conversation, please feel free to jump in.
Sure, there could be any other number of constraints, such as required mitigations due to regulatory reasons or other types of reasons. So you can add whatever constraints are necessary.
Sorry, let me continue, please. That doesn't quite answer my question. What I'm confused about is, what are the decision variables in this problem, and what is it that makes it a linear program?
So I'm not. What makes it a linear program is that you are minimizing. You are selecting portfolios of mitigations that minimize residual risk. Very straightforward. And you can do it for minimizing residual risk in terms of average risk and in terms of tail average risk.
Again, that's what I don't understand. Is the decision variable a 0-1 variable that says a mitigation is in the portfolio or not?
Yes.
And if that's the case, then you don't have a linear program. What you have is a 0-1 optimization problem.
I think you're splitting hairs, because you use a linear solver to solve for it.
Thank you for your answer. I disagree with it, but that's irrelevant.
I don't know what there is to disagree with it, because I have personally done it, so I've demonstrated it can be done. And I'm using fairly basic linear solver available online for free.
Okay, Brian, could.
Hey, thanks, Eddie. Thanks, Matt.
Yeah, go ahead.
So if you guys can go to the previous slide.
The previous slide? Yep.
Yeah, just a question. No, actually, not this one, the one before that. I think the one with all the portfolios. Yes, this one. Thank you. So
Okay.
if I'm understanding, this is just one scenario for total monetized. So I'm just trying to add up how many scenarios you guys envisioned. So there's 3 budget scenarios. There's tail unexpected. There's 3 attributes, and then we have 10 risks. So that's 180 graphics that you guys would envision us producing.
10 risks. Yeah, I mean, this would be essentially for 1 risk. Yeah, that's correct. Yeah. So, but you would be presenting it in each of your chapters, essentially. Yeah. Right.
So, no, it's good clarifier. So the other one is, this just assumes, and I think we brought it up on Wednesday, that we would know all scoped work at each location, which, there's questionable if we even be able to do that. So I'm assuming this is at the risk reduction unit you guys are envisioning?
No, these are the portfolios. right? So the portfolios are made up of mitigations. The
So-
portfolios are made up of, yeah.
So the sum of all the risk reduction units across the portfolio, is that the way to read it?
I mean, you guys present it also as programs, correct?
That's right. That's right.
Right.
Okay.
And so
Just
it,
clarifying,
the program would be the sum of all the risk reporting units. Yes.
So, and again, I'm just asking this for, implementation questions. So if we were to have, I don't know, we had 100 circuit system, right? Let's just assume that.
Mhm.
And each one of those circuits are an RRU. So portfolio one would be 99 cover conductor, 0, one unit of bare. And then portfolio two would be 98, 2 units of bare, and so on and so forth. Is that right in every iteration thereof?
I mean, you would have multiple iterations because each portfolio could have a different constellation of, but keep in mind that the whole point of the efficient frontier is that there are many portfolios that are worthless and you don't necessarily need to create them, correct?
Oh, well, I don't know. We've gotten some interesting data requests. So I'm just trying to think about logistically how we would do this. Okay, well, thank you for your answer. I think I understand better now.
Great. Yeah, Mark.
Thanks, Eddie. Could you scroll back to slide 63, please?
Sure. I think this one?
Yeah, exactly. Okay.
Great.
So, I'm gonna go on what sounds like a soliloquy here, but I promise there's a sincere question at the end.
Okay.
So, as I'm looking at this, for example, right, and there are a couple of features stand out. One is, between each of these portfolios, and let's just kind of look at the one on the left, portfolio 3 and portfolio 4, we draw this blue line sort of innocuously to suggest that you can achieve anything in the middle, right? And I think that's a natural idea from finance, especially from, again, the Markowitz optimization that inspired this. But when we're dealing with discrete decisions, that's not quite the case, right? So you won't be able to form, convex combinations, as it were. And here we really drive at the difference between the finance approach and this, which is sort of related to the discreteness issues that Dr. Feinstein has highlighted. In the finance approach, the linear optimization, the optimization is pretty straightforward, right? It's mean variance. It's a convex, objective, right? A concave objective. It's quadratic. And the constraints are linear. And so you can solve for the optimum just using calculus. You don't even have to simulate anything, right? You can literally analytically solve for it. Here, we're introducing this idea that you mentioned last time, to the n potential portfolios that you have to iterate over. And it would be really helpful to understand how, one, how concretely we can achieve that, because I imagine the means to do it is heavily dependent on some underlying assumptions about the problem that could be fragile. And secondly, I think the end goal is pretty noble in the sense that, right, what are we after at the end of the day? We're after discipline on costs while making sure that we have some rigorous way to select the best portfolio. But even in the finance application, this is really sensitive to the inputs, right? Where where different portfolios can come out. You can hop from portfolio 4 to portfolio 9 to portfolio 7 with even slight perturbations of the inputs that you put in. And that's going to be exacerbated by the fact that, unlike the finance case, this is a discrete problem, and we haven't even talked about, exactly what the objective is, right? If the objective is benefit minus cost, then we're talking about 45-degree, contour lines that at the tangent point indicate what your best portfolio might be. So, on this note, if the idea is that we ultimately want to be transparent about this, and we end up running this portfolio optimization scheme, and it gives us wildly different mitigation profiles from cycle to cycle that are driven in large part by statistical noise, is there a concern at all that this might actually, obscure the idea, right? The nature of the problem, or is it adding transparency?
Well, could I also ask the question, is the concern that the optimization may create a situation where it doesn't optimize other considerations that the utility is making that may affect your general rate case? Is that part of the concern?
That can be one concern, but even if we take the stylized, framework and discard all of that, just on its own terms, the results can be really sensitive, right? And this is pretty well known in finance, but
Sure.
that problem I would venture to say is even more stable than it is here because everything is smooth. It's not discrete. Once you add the discreteness on top of this, what you're really talking about, I mean, and I'm trying to put this in as non-technical parlance as I can, but what you're really talking about is, right, slight deviations in the effectiveness will drive you from one portfolio to another, and these two may not resemble anything like each other, right? If program A has 50% effectiveness and program B has 49.9% effectiveness, even slight mismeasurements here, right, will drive you from one regime to another where there's no promise of continuity between the two, right? And so if you take these results at face value, they're going to indicate, and they're not going to indicate why, right? They're just going to give you an optimal result that jumps around, and is highly volatile. And my concern is that, if we see that in finance where the problem is multiples smoother and more regulated, won't we see that here to the nth degree?
Well, I'll let Matthew speak to that, and then I think I have a follow-up though that I want to ask you guys. So go ahead, Matthew.
Okay, so Mark, you mentioned the discrete versus smooth issue several times. That seems to be an interesting piece. I don't think that it's right unless I'm misunderstanding. In finance, you're talking about a set of discrete units called stocks. Nothing, and if you think of a portfolio of stocks as being the same thing as a portfolio of mitigations, I think that's directly analogous and at the same level of discreteness. So that's one. If you mean something else, then please explain.
Yeah. Okay. I think we're getting closer. I do mean something else because if you allocate $100 to stocks, you don't just allocate it to one stock or the other, right? You can allocate, $52.71 to one stock, and that'll leave you, $47.29 for the other stock, right? You can do it on a continuous scale.
Okay,
and
that I understand.
Yeah, so that continuity is really important because then it means you don't have to test out all the potential combinations, right? They don't do this by, thinking about all the dollars and cents. You can just use calculus to do this. And that's what makes this, this, right? You able to put this in a Lagrangian and actually, right, be faithful to the linear part of linear optimization. And so when you're doing this over a discrete set of problems, it's like, it's actually the sequestration problem of putting half my money towards building 2 aircraft carriers, that are half built is not the same thing as building one or the other, right? And so, we really get into these. Yeah,
I agree, and I do see now how it relates to Dr. Feinstein's point. And so yes, so basically what this is a linear program with the binary variable option selected. Here's the view is in my playing around with this using small numbers of portfolios. In fact, you don't see wildly different portfolios clustering around the efficient frontier. You see ones that are quite similar. That portfolio 4 and portfolio 7, for example, differ by have mostly the same mitigations and might differ by 1 or 2 and aren't that different, which is a good thing to know because then you can say, well, you're pretty secure in in making the choice that you want. Now, if there is one that's completely different, I think that's great. Then you have something to talk about. Why is it different? What is one heavily safety focused, another one is heavily reliability focused? Well, now you have a trade-off decision, and that's what we want to talk about. So the point of this approach is to generate some very feasible options, and if if some of them are quite different, talk about make a choice, and then talk about why we chose the one versus the other. I think that's the entire point of this, and that would be a very good outcome.
And Dr. Feinstein, if I could just interject real quick, I just want to reiterate that the staff proposal is not prescriptive in terms of how optimization should be done. This is, essentially a hypothetical approach of linear programming that we have, basically presented here, and that the contractor has given us for food for thought for the most part. But at least from SPD's perspective, if there are other ways to optimize, I think we stated very clearly in the proposal that we're open to hearing those suggestions. And certainly within comments like that's definitely something that we would be interested in learning more about. So I just wanted to make sure that was clear.
May I, since you addressed me, may I reply?
Yeah, absolutely, of course.
My question was really a matter of understanding, because when it's stated that a program or a problem is linear programming, then that problem has a particular structure.
Yeah.
I understand how it's possible to find efficient frontiers using linear programming, because, well, for one thing, I've written a couple of papers on it myself, and second of all, you need to have a particular structure for the objective function and the constraints. I didn't see that here. And the reason that I raised the question was what Mark Lee was getting at, was that in the Markowitz model, the decision variables are portfolio weights. And those are continuous variables from 0 to 1. They're not discrete. In this problem, you have a discrete variable. It's certainly true that you can flip a switch and get a piece of software to solve a problem, but you're not solving a linear program, and that's important to know. What you're doing is you're bouncing from discrete point to discrete point in a way that's inconsistent with linear programming. That's not relevant for this discussion necessarily. What is relevant, I think, and it might be useful to keep this in mind, is the idea of transparency. So when you add this sort of methodology, you're telling people who are trying to figure out what it is that you've done in terms of transparency and repeatability, that they now have to solve optimization problems to figure out what's going on. I understand that one might want to do that, to solve optimization problems, to learn different things. I question whether or not, particularly the way this problem is formulated, that the result of the optimization algorithm is appreciably different than the result of ranking. I question it. I don't say that that's, I'm not championing the position. I'm just asking whether or not that has been considered. I think the ideas of repeatability and transparency are fundamentally important. And every time you change something like this and you impose additional computational conditions, then that transparency and repeatability is decreased.
So,
and I think it's worth considering.
Yeah, absolutely. Dr. Feinstein, I just want to make sure that that we're clear, at least on the same page of one thing, is that right now the RDF does have a ranking approach, except that there's language in the RDF that specifically says that the ranking of our cost efficiency metrics, such as CVRs, or previously it was RSEs, is not the only deciding factor in whether or not a mitigation should be chosen. And so there's a lack of transparency in what those other deciding factors are. And I believe that adding an optimization aspect of some sort to the RDF is crucial in order for us to have further discussions about those other decision-making factors. Now, like I said, we have not, prescribed what that optimization should be. We are just saying that it needs to be part of the analytical process. and that can be part of our evaluations of a ramp application. So I hope we're on the same page with that. Does that I guess clarify?
Yes, clarified. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Okay, great.
I
Thanks.
appreciate the opportunity to just raise the issue. Thank you.
Yep, great. Is there anything else that folks wanted to mention about this particular? Oh yeah, go ahead, Matthew.
Yeah, I saw in the comments Brian mentioned, Brian Landry from SCE mentioned we would have to assume some level of uncertainty around the frontier. Wholeheartedly agree. I imagine that we would be looking at the set of optimal and near optimal portfolios, because there could be a situation where for some reason, the near optimal portfolio just means much sense. And yes, from a theoretical standpoint, it's slightly less good than the optimal, but there's reasons that are not included in the model that sense to do it. That of course we should be looking at it that way. This is not meant to be a very, very literal, purely mathematical exercise.
Great. Yeah, Mark.
Yeah, that's offers a lot of clarity. I think building on that point, practically speaking, with the number of mitigation programs that we're dealing with and the number of parameter inputs that you feed into this, I wouldn't be too surprised if we don't get, 1 or 2 or 3 near optimal portfolios, but 1,000, 2,000 of them, right, that you could potentially look at. And so the process to, of course, you can ask your model which one is the best, but that is going to be a bit of a black box. And so now we have to siphon through those qualitatively, which how there's concerns about how a third party, right, would view this. So, and how anybody would validate this. So, practically speaking, if we were to do this,
Right. So Mark, could you
it would have to be, like a heavy dose of judgment.
So Mark, could you elaborate right now about how you determine, your constellation of mitigations that you've been submitting in your recent ramp? What was the decision-making factors in that? You did have risk rankings in some cases, but you regularly cited that risk ranking was not the only decision-making factor, correct?
Yeah, I think, you can take the finance analogy here too as well, where, something that's been popularized is not looking at the optimal portfolio per se, but looking at metrics that tell you what's the marginal contribution of each of your components, right? So in that, right? I mean, in that sense, I think it's what is the direction that pushes you towards a better risk profile, rather than let's jump directly to, right, the black box output. So I think the idea is that it's more about doing this in a way that's practical with agreement on, at the end of the day, I think it's absolutely a valid concern that, right, you would want to think about different combinations of portfolios that you can use, right, or of programs that you could use in different portfolios. But, the exact methodology, I guess my point is the exact methodology that you use to do this, it really matters a lot, right? And it really matters in terms of how many you want to consider, because taking this at face value would lead us to consider thousands, and it's not feasible. A number of steps will have to go in the process to filter that out. But what you end up with is a situation that's, I guess my point is, running through the optimization, it's going to be maybe 95% noise and 5% signal, right? And the work to do that, do we gain a lot over what we're currently doing?
Okay. Yeah, go ahead, Matthew.
Could you show one of the plots that has the portfolio 161?
Yep.
So I think what I'm hearing is that, wow, this cluster of dots here in real life is going to be some huge number, and it could be, but I feel like it would be very easily to filter it down to a manageable number. So, for example, these dots here are over a very wide budget range. Simply limiting, the budget to a narrow range is going to get rid of a lot of the dots, and you can do further filtering from there. So the key is that you're filtering based on knowing what the optimal results look like. The way it's being done now is I don't see how any of the utilities could even evaluate enough of the portfolios by hand, manually, to make sure that they are including the optimal portfolios. That's really the question. It goes back to Dr. Feinstein's ranking. I think ranking would be feasible if you were able, if you knew what the set of possibilities were. As you point out, the 2 to the n minus 1. I don't think anybody's going to be able to create enough of those portfolios to really be able to rank them.
Or a follow-up question to that is, Mark, are you arguing that we should just strictly use ranking as the way to select our portfolio?
No, I don't think that's true at all. But I think there's probably some middle ground between ranking and, running through a ton of discrete optimizations that don't necessarily add transparency or even, a realistic solution at the end, right? We're not going to switch from one regime to another regime, in a volatile fashion, I guess.
Mark, the way I interpret it, and I think could make a lot of sense, is that there could be some filtering or ranking processes up front, even before you do the optimization, saying that we.
Sorry, just
Vincent, could you please mute yourself? You're coming through. And in that sense, you using some judgment that what you just know has to be true, or put no or non-starters right away. So let's not even put them in the optimization, and some kind of iterative, subjective, and mathematical approach. I think you could make a case for that. I mean, and defend it as an approach. But right now, what we see is two things. One is it's almost purely subjective and completely opaque. We cannot see how any of the choices that go into the ranking are made. And so, to me, using the linear program, or if we don't like the term because of the binary variables linear program, please propose what you think the right name for it is. But using this optimization approach is far more transparent than what is occurring today.
So this is Vincent Lowe speaking for PG&E. I just want to mention, I think that I think what Mark is getting to, I think, is that we have not had enough opportunity to fully understand the concerns and to fully vet through what you're proposing here. Mark and Professor Dr. Feinstein, my apologies, have brought up some concern. You've mentioned that you've had some experience, admittedly small scale experience. So I think it's entirely justified to make sure that what we're proposing, right, the cure doesn't, what is the thing, the cure doesn't, it's no worse than the symptoms or whatever. We make sure that whatever we're proposing actually solves the problem that we're trying to solve. That's what we're saying.
Okay, Vincent, I just want to make sure that, again, that we're clear that essentially what we're proposing is that the utilities create portfolios of mitigations that have a budget constraint, and that it's up to the utility to determine what the optimization approach is for that. So are you saying that that's too prescriptive?
I'm saying that, I'm not I'll just mention I'm not an expert in optimization, but I think what we're trying to convey is that, if we kind of impose strict formal mathematical optimizations on some of these problems, what we might end up with are solutions that are highly sensitive and don't add to the transparency. In fact, kind of detract from the transparency goals that we're trying to accomplish in the RDF. So that's the concern. I'm not saying that is the truth of it. We just don't have time to figure out right now what the situation, the whole landscape of this problem. And so without that, it's hard to jump into any particular jump into the requirement to require mathematical optimization. And by optimization in your language, it seems to me you're thinking about mathematical optimization. Or is that not the case?
I think that the optimization that we're looking at this point is based on the optimizing of portfolios and trying to get greater transparency on how that optimization is done. I don't see how the language that we've provided in the staff proposal has limited you to a particular mathematical approach to doing that optimization.
Does it limit you to? Okay, that's fine. That's fine. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. And yeah, I know you don't like me saying that you can provide additional feedback and comments, but if you feel that you aren't ready to discuss that particular aspect right now, then feel free to provide us with some type of a solution, I guess, other than what we've heard so far, because I don't think that I've heard an alternative quite yet. Although it sounded like Mark maybe was about to suggest some type of middle ground, and maybe after PG&E has internally discussed this, we would appreciate hearing what that alternative middle ground might be. So I will leave it at that. Is there any other thoughts? Mark, you still have your hand up, but is that just a legacy?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, it is legacy, but I guess one really resonant point that Vincent brought up was it's guaranteeing the precision of inputs is, I think, regardless of how you do the mathematical optimization, a key part of this, right? Garbage in, garbage out. So, when you have any mathematical optimization that, is highly sensitive to the inputs, there's a question of, should you be spending really more time thinking about having better parameters that are fed into it, or should you, spend more time building up a schema that is going to be, pretty volatile no matter what happens, because the parameter faithfulness is still the more important part of this. So, I mean, I'm not sure if I've articulated that well, but I'll just leave that parting thought.
Okay.
If I could add one thing to that, though, this is Henry
please,
Sweat. Henry Sweat from SPD. I think that concern, though, is still a concern that we have now. I think when the risk modeling is happening now, this parameter uncertainty that's being input is still like a huge matter of uncertainty. And I think on some level, that's one of the reasons why the optimized portfolios really starts to help us, right? Because we start seeing how different portfolios and how different optimized portfolios are going to look and reduce risk, and in these two dimensions. And we start seeing like how that sensitivity, we actually get a visual look at that sensitivity based on what's getting with this number of portfolios. And I'm not sure I'm saying it's right, but I think that that parameter uncertainty is still a known problem that is occurring right now. And I think that this optimization process will start to show that, right? And we'll start to show that, and we'll start to like give us a better sense of like what are all the options and what are the trade-offs between those options, and also like and I think it'll really help us visualize some of these parameter uncertainties that we're talking about. And I think like that's one reason like for the optimization portfolio approach is that we can see the effect of varying different parameters and see how far you are from the so-called like efficient frontier based on how those parameters are getting varied. And so I think that this is going to help us visualize what you're talking about even more, Mark. And you know, to the extent that sensitivity analyses are included in this, you know, I think that will again provide more, could potentially provide even more transparency to this, and help us understand the bigger picture.
Thanks, Henry. Brian and Vincent, I see that you guys have your hands raised, but I do want to get us to a break if that's okay. And then we still have quite a bit of time where we could come back to continue to discuss this. But I do want to, that's okay?
I just wanted to address just wanted to reply to Mr. Sweat, but we can do that after the break. That's good.
Well, we're going to come to a different topic after the break, if that's all right, and then but we can circle back at this. I think that there'll probably still be some time after that to circle back on these questions. So, but I'll make sure to let you guys go first after we circle back after that topic. So, thanks, guys. Let's go to a break real quick, and then we will be. I guess I didn't put a break slide in. Anyway, we'll be back at 11 o'clock. Thank you. All right, everybody. If I could get a couple of thumbs up that you're back from your break, appreciate it. All right, thanks, officer. Okay, great, thank you, I appreciate that. I'm gonna go ahead and get us started. We have had, including today, quite a bit of important technical discussion about the various parts of the staff proposal. But yesterday, I think that Dr. Mitchell in particular raised an important procedural question. I just wanted, and I'm glad to see that Dr. Mitchell was able to join us again. So I just wanted to make sure that I kind of first that I clarify how staff are kind of seeing the progression of integrating the risk tolerance working group or the CURTS working group into the overall ramp process. But also I want to kind of go back to that discussion to make sure I understand procedurally what are the options for how risk tolerance can be properly integrated into what we already have in the RDF. And so this morning I was looking through, kind of the general approach that we see in the rate case plan, and I was realizing that we've added certain components over the years to the ramp process, especially the pre-ramp process, including like having pre-ramp workshops and whatnot. And we don't really have a table like this to describe kind of what happens before that May 15th date where the utility initiates its ramp proceeding. So I kind of sketched this up this morning and just thinking that if we were to start from the moment that the utility issues a tranche white paper, which is, that's currently part of the RDF process, is, kind of an ability for the utility to offer up an alternative to the tranching method that we discuss in phase 3 decision. And then that would be discussed, of course, at a pre-ramp workshop. And then, parties get the opportunity, and SPD gets the opportunity to reply to the white paper. So where we see this kind of fitting is that directly after that point, once we have been presented with the selection of risks and the tranching approach has been discussed, approximately a month after that, we would begin the work with the CURTS working group, the discussion, and that could take place over about a 21-day period where the deliberation would be completed, and then the risk tolerance approach would then be integrated into the utility's ramp application. And I just wanted to make sure that, that's clear in the staff proposal, and if it's not, we can try to make some clarifications, or you can provide us with places where you'd like clarification in your comments. And then what I wanted to do was offer up, especially maybe some of the other interveners, if you had questions about this, or if you had suggestions for an alternative. I think one thing that Dr. Mitchell had suggested yesterday was that there may need to be a separate proceeding that discusses risk tolerance. And I just wanted to hear from, maybe TURN or EPUC IS or Cal Advocates if they had additional thoughts about that in particular. Yeah, so any of that is kind of open for discussion at this point. And I just wanted to kind of circle back to that question before I open it up to a general conversation. And so far, I only see Dr. Landry's hand up, but Brian, did you have something in particular you wanted to ask about this, or?
No, this is more of a question for, back to Henry. I think that it's just, I wanted to just talk about it just real quick, get it out now. I'll have a separate comment about this. So I'm just want to make sure we don't call these optimal portfolios, because I can't stress this point enough that there's a huge level of uncertainty, and we don't know. We're not really optimizing for anything. We're just plotting things on a graph. So I just wanted to get that out and make that clear. The next thing I wanted to point out here is there's a couple of other milestones that may be missing.
Okay.
So there's also the ESJ pilot white paper that are due. There's also the climate pilot white paper that are due. And then there's also, an optional power law white paper that is due as well. And then finally, I think based on just this timeline, just a quick reaction, I don't know if we have 21 days that Kurtz could actually logically respond to all those. Kurtz can respond to risk tolerance. We'll start there. And then if the same parties that are responding to risk tolerance are also reviewing all those documents that I just mentioned, it may just be burdensome on staff and parties to review everything all that at the same time. I'm just foreseeing an overwhelming amount of work for staff and for us. And I'm also seeing this is also concurrent with our WMPs, which you guys all know. And then also I'm looking at, if this happens every year and we have an extension of the RDF proceeding, this again will overlap the RDF proceeding. I know San Diego's preparing their ramp now, and it's becoming challenging to split amongst these topics. So I just want to make sure that everyone's aware that the more new activities that would pile on, the less engaged that parties can be. And then finally, what I want to do is just ask this question. I know that parties, based on the schedule to this workshop, parties are only allowed till, I think, a few more days to provide counter proposals. Is that correct? Just with the Thanksgiving holiday?
The deadline is for next Wednesday.
That's right. So I just want to make sure that I don't think, and this is case in point, I don't know if that's enough time to react to this discussion that we've had today and then offer a meaningful counter proposal. So I know there's no real good answer to that, but I just wanted to make sure that was on the record.
We'll come back to that at the next steps portion. At the end, we can have a quick conversation about that.
Okay.
As for the optimal portfolios discussion, we're going to come back to that in a little bit. As for the ESJ pilot, the climate pilot, I mean, those are submitted with your ramp. They're not submitted before your ramp. And so I appreciate that you're concerned about how much time that staff and parties are going to have to be putting into evaluating those. That's noble. But those are also one-off white papers. They're not expected to be every year or every ramp. They're an opportunity for the utilities yes, there are workshops. Thank you, Gary. But there are also an opportunity for the utility to discuss those topics and then have a further discussion within either the RDF proceeding or a successor of the RDF proceeding to make those particular topics integrated into the ramp. So just want to make sure that we're clarified on what those are. Tom, if you wanted to.
So Eddie, I'm responding to your invitation to talk a little bit about this new slide you put up and the schedule. What you're showing is how the Kurtz working group timing would work in connection with the preparation of the ramp report. And that's useful to know. I think Dr. Mitchell, and I know what I was saying yesterday is that I don't envision, particularly if utilities are voting members of this Kurtz working group, and I think there's maybe a legitimate question about whether they should be voting members or just advisory members. But if they're voting members, they're not going to vote for anything other than what gets the risk tolerance to be as low as possible. And the other members may have very different views. Some of them may agree with that, but I'm quite sure some will not. And I don't see how we achieve consensus. So I just see a need for a commission decision. That's the point. We need we're going to need, if risk tolerance is going to be an important decision-making factor for the commission, and there's another question there about whether it should, but if it is, then the commission's going to need to decide what the risk tolerance is, because I don't think there's going to be a consensus. I, I may be wrong. I mean, that's just my prediction.
And Tom, if I'm not mistaken, actually, I think that there are other approaches that even at the commission, there has been other approaches that have been taken in order to actually address the possibility that consensus can't be made on this particular topic. And so, if it's
You may be referring to ADR, an alternative dispute resolution. Is that what you're referring to?
No, I mean, there's the actually after last night, after we all wrapped up, I did have the opportunity, and actually my boss actually shared with me some previous documents where there was basically procedures within some of the early fire map approaches that allowed for a report to be written essentially where parties would disagree, and they could actually place their disagreements directly into the report, and that could then be used as an explicit output into the decision-making factor of how the map should be created. And I would just recommend that folks review that. I've added that into, or I will add that into the proposal that we're going to finally submit. And I would just recommend that folks kind of look into that as maybe one option. And I think providing us with other solutions would be welcome if the feeling is that consensus is just not feasible.
Could I briefly respond?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, that's, dissenting or concurring or whatever kind of report or paper you want to put in an overall report is great. And I think that's what Joe was saying, that the positions need to be made clear. But it's if the utilities hold in the end hold the cards about what gets put in the ramp report and what gets proposed. And as I was trying to emphasize yesterday, the commission feels like it doesn't feel like the general rate case proceeding is the place to be deciding these quantitative risk methodology issues that sometimes the commission thinks are better addressed in the RDF proceeding. Then we're going to have an unresolved risk tolerance where the utilities will just be applying their risk tolerance. And I don't know what we will have achieved. And I worry that we'll have something dignified by, but it's within the risk tolerance, but it's not going to be an agreed upon risk tolerance, and it's not going to be a commission decided risk tolerance. It's just going to be a utility chosen risk tolerance.
Okay, that's something at least for us to consider and think about. So I appreciate you adding those comments. Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Dr. Mitchell, I also noted your questions in the chat. I can tell you that SPD does not have the ability to change the schedule of the scoping memo, certainly not in this workshop. So I do recommend that, if there is a feeling or a need that parties have to ask for an extension, that please follow the procedures that are necessary in order to request that. So, but did you have an additional follow-up question that you wanted to ask?
Oh yeah. I just wanted to sort of underline what Tom just said. Now that I see the actual proposed schedule, I not sometimes I'm overly negative, but I really don't see a path to success on that. Okay. You have to remember that the Kurtz working group, people show up at the table, but we're not deputized by anybody except the people supporting our groups. And this team is not going to be somebody who has the ability to determine risk for all of California. That's the commission's job, and it's a big job, and the commission's going to have to make a decision on that. And if it's input to the utilities, I mean, this isn't saying anything negative about the utilities. They've got a different perspective on, how they serve the public and how they serve their shareholders and so forth, and they have to achieve that balance. There's nothing wrong with that, but they have to select a different risk tolerance attitude than other people and parties and interested stakeholders in California. And so there's no expectation anybody should have that there's going to be a consensus coming out of that. And that's okay. That's perfectly fine. And I think, as Coco lived through the map making experience. Now, I think there's a little bit of allergy to the map making experience because it did go on for a very long time. I'm partially responsible for that, and I can explain, I know why, but I don't think that's absolutely necessary. There are other portions of that, like the, data collection and other things that were decided much more quickly in the risk rulemakings after the 2007 fires. And it basically followed the process that you just discussed, I think successfully, where you do have open sharing of perspectives. You can have votes, but they're not binding votes. They just go into the record. People then file their objections or support for various proposals in that. And then the commission decides what's going to be accepted and what isn't. And I think that was quite successful as far as producing changes to commission rules. And I think it would be very successful in producing a commission statement on risk tolerance that the utilities can cleanly use to input into the ramps and carry it to success. I don't think it's a easy, quick process that's going to be done in a month or 21 days. Don't think that's possible either. It's a big discussion. Let's not pretend it isn't. And let's plan around that big discussion and, when it can happen and when we can get the outputs from it. And then when you should start using those outputs as inputs for the ramp. That's going to be my recommendation. And, I think it'd be better if I formalized it a little. And that's why I think we're going to need an extension to the Wednesday deadline, at least for this workshop, because I wasn't really, I haven't been didn't look too much at the proposal and didn't really understand exactly what the implications were. But now that I see what the implications are, I think there needs to be an alternate proposal. Thanks.
Okay, great.
Joe, can I quickly interject? To be clear, you're requesting an extension for the Wednesday deadline for parties to file counter proposals?
Yes, at least on the issues discussed in workshop 2.
Okay, thanks.
And I'm just wondering, Dr. Mitchell, though, is it possible to, also do some of that within the comment period, or do you feel that it would be necessary to kind of formulate an alternative proposal and submit that?
I think it would be better to have an alternative proposal because it's good for everybody to be able to have a say. I think once it goes into comments, then you're only the only input that other parties have is reply. You don't have it vetted as well, because I don't want to throw something out there and then have it adopted and it's the wrong thing to do. So, and I don't think it's going to be, any more than a couple pages. I'll just be basically saying, let's, review what we did during the rulemaking post 2007 workshops and use that as a template for how to get an output out of this. And, Coco was involved and he knows a lot about that process too. And so I think it can work here too. As I said, as far as the map going up, becoming a eternity project, yes, it did. And I know why, and I'm partially at fault for that, but it's not the process itself. It was the extra layers of abstraction that we put into it. Thanks.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah. Okay, great. Mr. Mosher, I see you have your hand up as well.
Yeah, thanks, Eddie. You invited comment from EPUC and indicated shippers, and EPUC and indicated shippers have a penchant for development of a fulsome record. So that's kind of the context of the big question that's always looming in our minds as to, do we have enough sufficient to inform commission decision making? And although we agree, having consensus at the Kurtz level is the ideal, as expressed here in this workshop, it may not always be feasible. And so in that light, at least what I see as the value of the Kurtz group in the discussion is narrowing the fairway of options and the path forward for the commission, bringing the bumpers or the guardrails in so that the commission can make a more focused decision. And by having a more fulsome record, including if we need to extend the deadlines for proposals of alternative pathways, we think that's a step in the right direction. Better to go maybe a little slow at first to go fast, but we wouldn't want to protract this, proceeding here by, say, opening another proceeding. I think that was your original question. Don't see the need for that, but then again, Commissioner John Reynolds may think differently, and the commission itself may have a different viewpoint on that. But at least I think that's where we are, is let's develop a fulsome record and do what it takes to get that, but not unduly protract the timeline on this proceeding.
Yeah, no, I thank you. I appreciate that. Dr. Mitchell, did you have a comment that you wanted to add, or is that still a hand that you've left out? Yeah, okay.
Left over.
Okay, great. Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Thank you very much for those comments. I just wanted to open it up real quick to see if there's any additional comments on this procedural issue, and if there's anything else that folks wanted us to be aware of in terms of just procedure, yeah, how we might be able to further integrate risk tolerance into the RDF, recognizing that this is a complex approach. Yeah, you go ahead.
Hi, Yumi from PG&E. Good morning. So here it is the schedule. I'm looking at the schedule proposed here. The Kurtz working group discussion will complete the risk tolerance in February 7. And then, like, how can we possibly incorporate that risk tolerance in the RAMP filing from February to May? So to give you the context, right, for RAMP filing in May 15, the planning should have been done the prior year. And then analysis are almost done. And then in February, March, those time period actually writing involved. So there is not much time to do the optimization or identify issues with optimization with the risk tolerance constraints. I don't see any way that it will result in meaningful changes in the proposed portfolio for the RAMP if risk tolerance is decided in February 7.
Okay.
I think it should be at least 6 months earlier, or even more, considering that if the commission has to decide what risk tolerance to use for the RAMP, shouldn't that be included in here as well? And give more enough time so that meaningful risk analysis or optimization can be done. It takes time.
And that also means that your risk selection would need to be done before that, because you have to know which risks you're intending to include within the RAMP. So does that mean the utilities are prepared to present their risk selection, at least 40 days before the 6 months that you just recommended?
Yeah, I think that given that the GRC, I mean, this is my thinking, not solicited with the rest of the team at PG&E, but given the GRC decision is made, then we will have some time to incorporate that into the risk analysis and see what the next test year risk will look like, and go with that if we do that process early. Right.
Yeah, but and that's a feature that, you know, certainly SPD staff cannot guarantee when a GRC decision would be issued. So, you know, but so the question is it possible for a utility to decide on risk selection before a GRC decision has been completed?
There might be changes in the risk models, just like how we are currently doing, right? When we select the risk scores or ramp risks, when we do the ramp filing, the risk scores can change, and then trenching could change because more work is done. But at least we can have the snapshot because this risk analysis is ongoing. So I think that we can choose the ramp risks early on, and that may reduce some uncertainty as well down the road, if that's helpful. I think it's more important to have the risk tolerance early on rather than selecting the risk later.
Yeah, that's good to know. I mean, also just to note that the RMR approach that we're going to be presenting in December, you know, we're looking at this in a slightly more cyclical, or we're expecting that we're going to be looking at this as a slightly more cyclical approach, where you know, we understand that as the GRC is actually implemented and enacted, there's going to be updates to your data that are going to be happening. And, you know, from experience, we know that within a GRC, within the, you know, the litigation of a GRC, you're even updating your models in that process. But the RMAR is going to be a place where that's going to have to be more transparent, and there's going to have to be more regular updates and probably more narrative and more explanation about why the update is necessary. And so just a heads up that's, I think in some ways it'll help you in terms of determining what your risk selection will be for a future ramp. But it's also going to make things a lot more transparent. And so, you know, there'll be more there'll be more required regular updates on, you know, how you're progressing with implementing your GRC. So I think there's benefits to you on that. And I think it does make it more reasonable to potentially move this risk tolerance working group back, you know, potentially like 6 months or so. I don't know if we can necessarily do that, but we'll definitely take it back and consider it. So I appreciate you bringing that to at least to our awareness.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead, Dr. Landry.
Yeah, so thanks, Eddie. I just want to just draft on what Yumi said. It's not just the risk themselves, but also the risk and the portfolios, which may be subject to GRC decisions, as she pointed out. But also, we also get concurrent instructions from and guidance from other entities like FERC or OEIS that we may have to revisit our assumptions. And I think that's a point that may be lost on other people, that it's not a push button exercise. So I just want everyone to be cautious about this, that, you know, there's a lot of pieces logistically that we're thinking about how this will fit. And I kind of agree with parties that this is just an unworkable timeline. We understand the importance of this. The other thing is, you mentioned RMAR and project templates, and I'll say it one more time. If we could understand how this is all going to fit together, that would be really awesome. But, you know, until we really understand how all these pieces fit together, it's going to be really hard for us to really definitively capture these timelines. And then finally, if we were to select our ramp risks earlier, select our projects earlier, that just makes everything more hypothetical as we go into this. So it makes the uncertainty greater and the fidelity of our analysis just less as we get to the ramp itself. So
Yeah.
I just want everyone to be cautious about that.
I mean, I understand that, you know, the selection of projects gets more hypothetical the further back that you go. I mean, you guys have made that argument for quite some time now. I just want to make sure that we're clear that the risk selection tranches, the risk tolerance is not necessarily about selecting projects, right? It's analyzing the risk that's the overall residual risk essentially that's on
That's
the
right.
system. Yeah, and then once all of that is worked out, it actually gives you an additional 6 months to determine what your optimal portfolio is.
That's if we would have started this year, but we're going forward.
No. I understand. I'm just kind of riffing off of what Yumi was just suggesting about moving the timeline back, and I understand that Edison has a different timeline potentially than what Yumi was just suggesting, because I don't think Yumi's suggestion actually would be feasible for what Edison is considering. Is that what your concern is?
My concern is literally the 18 months that we have to file the ramp and go through all this, the trials, I will call them. So that's the concern here. But even if this gets implemented and we're talking about the next cycle, it still may not be feasible. So I just want parties to be cautious about this.
And at some level, I mean, the utilities are going to need to make it feasible, or at least provide us with some type of a workable solution in order to integrate risk tolerance. I mean, it has to be integrated into the RDF. I mean, the utilities themselves have been asking for it, as Dr. Mitchell just pointed out in the chat. So there does have to be some type of a resolution to it at some point. And so any suggestions or recommendations for that, I think, would be helpful.
Yeah, I think the last thing I'll say is we did have a motion that we submitted to extend the timeline for this because we understand the importance. So I just want to point that out because this is not a simple topic. And so just
we understand
that.
And I think that the judge has already ruled very clearly on the position that the commission has taken on that, but I appreciate that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and I think that Dr. Mitchell's point about asking for an extension to provide additional proposals is something that the commission can definitely consider. And yeah, I would just recommend that that be submitted to the service list, and the judge will provide a ruling on that. Okay. Is there any other additional thoughts or concerns that folks wanted to add to the schedule? No? Okay. If not, we can actually address any of the questions from either today or pretty much we have the ability to talk about any issues that came before in the first 2 days. I know that Brian's already made his appeal to the portfolio and optimization issue, but and your response to Henry, but happy to hear. Oh, I believe Vincent, you also had a comment that you wanted to make about that, and I promised that I would give you the floor once we got through this section. So if you wanted to add your comment now, please go ahead.
Right. Thank you. If we can go back to the slide with the multiple portfolios.
Is it the blue one or this one?
No, that one there. No, the blue one. Yeah, blue one.
Okay.
57. Yeah, 57. So I think the concern is basically like, we use these optimal portfolio optimization things. We're going to see many dots all stacked up on portfolio 161, portfolio 165, portfolio 175, 178, all stacked up on the 600 by 600 axis. And why they're stacked up will be, they'll look, our concern, they'll look vastly different. And, based on slight perturbations in the inputs, you will be choosing any one of those dots that are kind of stacked up on 161 there. I think that's the transparency issue we're trying to highlight, right? So using these linear, using these optimizing portfolio approaches, mathematical optimization give us a transparency. Once again, I'm not here to say it doesn't, conclusively say it doesn't, just here to say that, I think this is something we should explore more rigorously than we have so far. And I'm done with this topic.
Okay. Thanks, Vincent. Yeah, Colin, go ahead. Colin, you had your hand raised.
Yeah, sorry, just throwing my video on. Yeah, Colin Fitzhenry, EPUC indicated shippers. I just had some commentary about slide 66. Particularly the comparison between tail risk mitigation benefits, average risk mitigation benefits, and potentially the use of, scaled average mitigation benefits. In particular, I think.
Did you mean this? So I just want to make sure that we're on the right slide. Was it this slide?
69. You're right. You're
69,
right. Sorry,
okay.
69. Yeah, thank you, Eddie. I think the methodology being proposed here by the SPD is sound for, the evaluation of tail average. I think it certainly, looks at those high consequence events and, provides some real metrics for consideration. But I do have some concerns about, maybe an over-reliance on it versus the average mitigation benefit. In particular, I think the average mitigation benefit is probably the most probabilistic outcome. So, over-relying on that tail average risk benefit might skew, the observation or the comparison of portfolios. In particular, I think the primary emphasis should be on the average mitigation benefit, with maybe, the tail average risk being a deciding factor between competing portfolios. With that said, I don't really find the scaled average mitigation benefits value to be very beneficial at all, because I don't think it provides any sort of transparency into what your average, mitigation benefit would be, or your tail average mitigation benefit would be. Instead, it's kind of somewhere in the middle. So I don't think that would be, very valuable. So those were my comments kind of about this slide in particular here. And that's all I really wanted to provide.
Let me just clarify though that this scaled it's not the scaled risk scores. This is the scaled risk tolerance. So that's the risk tolerance. So we're determining whether or not this 718 achieves that level of scaled risk tolerance, and whether this 2095 achieves this level of risk tolerance for tail average.
Sure, and I guess my commentary was more about the mitigation benefits and the value that metric provides. Because ultimately, we're going to be looking at BCRs and determination of and comparison of portfolios, of competing portfolios, right?
That's right.
So when we're looking at the BCR, which is going to be based off, off the average risk,
yeah,
there has to be some sort of consideration too for, what value the portfolio does in reducing tail average risk.
right.
And to that effect, my comment is just simple. I think the primary emphasis should be on the average mitigation benefit. Again, simply because I think it's the most probabilistic outcome.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I appreciate that. Tom.
Thank you, Eddie. I think I have 2, maybe 3 questions based on today's slides.
Okay.
Let me just bring them up here for a second. And again, as I said yesterday, these are sincere questions, not trying to make a point, just trying to understand.
Yep.
The first is I guess maybe this is a little bit of putting together yesterday and today. I'm having a little trouble seeing how the pieces together and whether they have to fit together.
Okay.
So how does in the paper, it didn't sound like the optimization exercise was optimizing, and I may not be using the right terminology, but optimizing for risk tolerance. It was optimizing for other things. So how does the, and I guess the slide is supposedly trying to answer that, but I guess I'm not quite understanding.
Sure.
A, how risk tolerance works in with the optimization exercise.
Okay.
And B, what happens if you don't do the risk tolerance? What horrible thing is happening then if we don't do the risk tolerance exercise?
Oh yeah, okay. So the first thing I just wanted to clarify is that what the optimization approach, at least in this particular approach that we've suggested, is that it's optimizing overall residual risk. So it's optimizing the maximum amount of mitigation benefit or risk reduction that we can achieve in order to reduce overall residual risk to a certain level. So that 718 is the leftover amount of residual risk, for like an entire electric grid, so to speak. Like after we've already implemented all of the mitigations, we get all this mitigation benefit, and then we're left over with that 718. And then we can compare that number against the risk tolerance level. And the risk tolerance level is our acceptance of overall residual risk. And if it doesn't meet that, if it does meet that number, like for instance, the neutral level here, it is lower than $800, right? And so therefore, there's no need to continue to invest in mitigations from the perspective of the risk neutral tolerance. But if we're adverse, then the adverse level is $700, and so this 718 value of overall residual risk, it's not enough. And so we would need to continue to reduce risk until we meet that $700 value. Does that help clarify a little bit?
Well, maybe, but I guess maybe it segues to my other main question, which is you talk a little bit about it today and in the paper about using budget constraints, but I don't really see it all that formalized in what you're proposing. And
okay,
I don't know how the budget constraint fits in with this slide.
Sure. Yeah, well, so the budget constraint is it's in a previous process or a previous step, right? But the budget constraint is that $585 that came from here, right? We had this spend of 585, and this is the amount of the amount of risk reduction that you get in safety and reliability for that amount. We also, saw the $585 here reducing a specific amount of risk for that particular budget. And then what we're showing with this slide is for that $585, how much mitigation benefit do you get? What's the overall residual risk? And does that get you to your risk tolerance level? So there's a couple steps, but the $585 is built into the results that are included here.
Okay. And then how are the utilities, who's going to decide what the budget constraints are?
Yeah, so the way that we have provided it, at least in this current approach, is that the utility does provide the budget constraint, just like they would in a in a GRC, but at present they're not necessarily making that explicit, and then it's up to the commission to determine what that is. And so at present, we're allowing the utility to make that budget constraint more explicit. They would need to justify it in the ramp. We actually, require them to include a justification for the budget constraint, and then that would be part of the GRC record going into the GRC proceeding.
What if interveners believe that the utility's choice of budget constraints are not even in the right ballpark? If they've chosen budget constraint of, and this is an illustrative, exaggerated example, but they choose a budget constraint of a very very high number, and then they subtract one, and then they subtract two from that.
Sure. I see. Your question is essentially what happens. Here we had a budget spend of 585, but what happens if their recommendation is 1,000 instead of 585? Great. That's an opportunity for the parties in the ramp process to make comment on the budget constraint that was presented, and that comment should then be entered into the GRC record, and then it can be further litigated within the GRC.
Further litigated within the GRC.
Right.
But I hope you heard me earlier. This is, and I speak from personal experience. When we did the first ramp after the settlement, the 2018 settlement, Turn devoted a lot of time and effort to critiquing PG&E's implementation, both in the ramp, and then because the ramp doesn't yield a decision, we thought, maybe naively, well, we should raise those issues in the GRC because this was particular to PG&E, how PG&E implemented it, and we wanted to show, and we raised a lot of issues, some of which have now been taken up in the RDF, and that's good. So it wasn't all in vain, but it was all brushed aside in the decision-making process because the commission had too much on its plate. So again, I worry that we assume that issues can be addressed in the GRC about whether the utilities have properly have chosen reasonable budget constraints to provide useful information for the commission. But I question whether we're going to get a litigated result on that.
Sure. Let me just explain one piece to this is that, our proposal is constrained by the current structure of the RDF and the current structure of the relationship between the ramp and the GRC. And so we had to at least write this proposal with that structure in mind. But if parties have suggestions about, how to address, the budget issue in a more productive manner, and you feel that it has to be addressed before the GRC, that's definitely something that you can recommend within comments. I can't say for certain how the commission would, interpret that. I can just say that at this point, that's the legacy, unfortunately, that or I don't know if it's unfortunate or not, but it's the legacy that at least staff have to face.
An alternative is to be more clear in this, and this is something I know you're going to say we can raise in comments, and I appreciate that. More clear in this process about the types, about how the utilities choose the budget constraints, and it's not just entirely up to them, but there is more guidance from the commission. Just as you were talking about the other day about there's concern about whether the utilities are putting in reasonable alternatives now when they're allowed to submit alternatives, and maybe that process hasn't worked so great. Maybe we need some more direction to the utilities to make those alternatives more meaningful.
Okay, I mean, yeah, yes. I definitely hear that, and it like I said, it's definitely something that I can't really comment on today, but there could be an ability for us to comment on that if it's discussed, either as an alternative proposal to what we presented here or as a comment on our proposal. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Matthew, did you have something that you wanted to jump in on, or
yes,
did you want Dr. Mitchell to go first? Okay, go ahead.
I just very quickly want just to remind you that the BCR can also serve as a constraint, to outlandish budget requests, because at some point, vastly increased spend is going to result in spending on mitigations that just don't meet anybody's BCR's hurdles. So I just wanted to put that's an additional break. It might not be as strong a break that as you would want, but it is something there that can help in these conversations.
That's right, and we actually have that listed already within the proposal. So thank you, Matthew, for reminding me of that. Yeah, Dr. Mitchell.
Yeah, I just want to piggyback on what Tom said. I think Cal Advocates has, recently within the last GRC cycles been requesting that the output of the ramp be more tangible, that there be a substantive decision on the ramp, because SPD puts a lot of work into preparing the reports. Interveners put a lot of work into putting input onto the ramp. We've been through, I think, a cycle for all the three major utilities now. And the most benefit that comes out of it is when the utilities actually adopt a intervener or party proposal. Otherwise, it goes into the reporting, it goes into a recommendation with the ramp, discussed briefly, filed with it, and the entire, in general, the GRC decisions have maybe one line in them stating that the utility responded to its ramp report, or did a ramp report. And that is the only causal linkage between any work that people do on ramp and what actually makes it into the GRC, aside from what the utilities actually incorporate and do. So to the extent that you want to modify utility behavior in the GRCs and the assumptions they make, that needs to be as explicit as possible, because making it, a friendly recommendation may or may not have any tangible effect. So thanks.
No, I appreciate that. I just want to kind of re up a kind of a point that I definitely hear all of these concerns. The one thing about adding maybe like a decision to the ramp that at least comes to my mind, and I'm not speaking for the commission here, but I do believe that adds additional time, procedural time to that timeline that I was just highlighting there. And so yeah, I just wanted to make sure that we're all aware that that adds that there's just costs and benefits. There's pros and cons that exist to adding in additional procedural elements to our schedule. And so I just hope that I just wanted to make sure that that's clear, and yeah, just to keep in mind while we're working through some of the either the alternative proposals or the comment period. So let's see, is there okay, is there any additional questions or thoughts on this particular topic, or did we want to move on to a different set of questions? And if Dr. Mitchell or Matthew, if you guys don't have any other questions, did you want to lower your hands, or do you have anything else to contribute? Okay, Mark, go ahead.
Hey, Eddie, thanks. Yeah, I'm as we're closing out these lines of reasoning, I'm just curious whether there's any appetite for this philosophy. So as we iterate through how we can work through and quantify some of these notions, is there an understanding that maybe small steps are more reliable and less noisy than trying to jump to individual optimized regimes? To not to be too technical about it, but I'm going to try to draw an analogy. You might laugh, to my personal life, but I'm trying to be a better person, right? So I can go about this in many ways. I can identify, every other week, someone whom I think is awesome or perfect, and that opinion might change week to week. So I'd like to be as good as Michael Jordan in basketball. That's so the way I could go about it is next week I'll frame my entire life schedule around what Michael Jordan does. And the week after that, I look at Harry Markowitz's career and I frame my entire life around what Harry Markowitz did. And that, that just generates some churn, right? Especially because my notion of what's optimal can fluctuate pretty wildly. And so maybe a way to get there, right, that's not as laden with traps is I can just look at where I am right now and I can identify, little marginal directions or steps I can take to make my life better. I can tomorrow work out a little bit more. The week after that, eat fewer cupcakes, right? The week after that, give my colleagues less grief. So, this is, I think we're all trying to get to the same place of more, more transparency and more cost effectiveness, but the way that we get there may be really important, and I just think the latter is a little bit more reliable than the former, but I'm curious to see how you think about it.
I appreciate the narrative on improving your improving your personal goals in life. I don't have a particular perspective on that at the moment, but I guess one thing to just keep in mind is that we're thinking about physical systems, and yeah, for the most part, I think we're thinking about physical systems, and so yeah, just it's an interesting perspective. I guess we'll have to yeah, consider it if that's something that you guys want to concretely discuss within the context of risk assessment when we get it. But yeah, thanks for the analogy. I appreciate that.
No problem. Not sure that was great either, but that's my best shot.
Okay, great, thanks. Yumi, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, it's not profound as what Mark was saying. My question is just simple. So if we think about optimization, and this is risk constraint, risk only optimization, where it seeks to find optimal risk mitigation portfolio given risk tolerance or budget constraints and probably operational constraints. I recognize that there are a lot of other, risk reducing programs that has the benefit for other benefit, non-risk benefits, like operational benefits or maybe it's efficiency benefits that are not quantified under the risk-based decision-making framework. And so how would you think we should treat those extra benefits that may not be captured in here in the optimization, because now we are trying to optimize or maximize the risk reduction, but then those programs still have benefit.
Yeah,
that's
sure.
not in here. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't presented the additional types of metrics that you may be thinking of. I'm not sure exactly which metrics you might be thinking of, but I think one of the ways that we were trying to discuss this is that when you're narrowing down the portfolios, I mean, when you start from this stage, you're only looking at cost and benefits, right? But when you narrow down your set of portfolios, part of that narrowing process is looking at the trade-offs associated with different operational metrics. This in particular is not necessarily an operational metric, it's reliability and safety, and those are still integrated into your benefit calculation. But I in my opinion, or at least my understanding, is that you could just as easily design a system like this to also consider different types of operational metrics. So I would probably need to understand what type of operational metrics that you were thinking of in order to better understand how it might work. But at least from our perspective, we haven't. I don't think we've included any language that would say you can't use an operational type of metric in your decision making, process.
Yeah, I understand that, but the real decision making is more complex. There are a lot of non-quantifiable benefits of a lot of activities that we do, right? Not everything is clear cut as, okay, I implement this mitigation program and it's going to reduce this risk. Some of the programs that we do have the benefits for reducing the risk or preventing risk events, but there is other benefits that are not quantifiable. but it's the right direction.
But I mean, you do surveys subject matter experts in order to determine whether or not those less quantifiable metrics are being addressed by a certain project or by a certain mitigation. And so doesn't that input from the subject matter experts, I mean, don't you have the ability to actually integrate that into your decision-making structure when you're determining optimization?
Well, I guess if we have 30 years for that, but like, do you really think that all of our GRC program can actually quantify all of the benefits, intangible benefits, in the same sense as what this risk reducing benefit can be quantified or compared against each other?
I mean, I can't answer PG&E. I can't answer for PG&E, so I don't know. But if you can provide us with concrete examples, then
so let me just talk about one thing that comes to my mind. Maybe automated AMI metering. So in the past, we didn't. I mean, we have one version that right now. Let's say we upgrade to the modern system that enables to allow us to detect certain ignition easier or faster, so that we can prevent that risk event if we updated this metering system. And maybe that's a small pocket of the benefit. We still may capture the benefit in the risk mitigation, but maybe the majority of the benefit is allowing all future potential possibilities of leveraging that technology. That is hard to quantify in concrete manner to compare with the risk reduction benefit.
So sorry, isn't that a foundational activity though?
Oh, well, it would have direct risk reduction.
And so you could calculate the risk reduction.
It could have other benefits that are not comparable with risk reduction measures, right? Not everything is quantified in a metric that can be compared with risk reduction.
I totally understand that, but I guess in the context of the RDF, we're focused on the risk reduction aspect of that. And so if you wanted to add in your RAMP application a narrative section that describes the additional benefits, I don't see why that would be a problem, and it can be part of your decision-making apparatus. But if it doesn't integrate into your optimization approach, then I'm not entirely clear on what it is that you think that's doing in terms of risk reduction, right? Because if the benefit doesn't have anything to do with risk reduction, then it's not part of your calculus. It may have a benefit for some other part of your GRC application, but then that should be discussed in another part of your GRC application.
But there are costs associated with it, right? How do you separate the costs of the work that has the benefit for the others, right? It's not, the cost is not splittable by
right. But the cost,
and there's budget constraints,
right? But the calculatable benefit is the risk reduction, and that's what you're including in your RDF application. So I don't know. In my opinion, I would recommend like you apportion the cost to the risk side of things so that you can properly calculate the BCR. But I don't know. I can't. You guys would have to provide us with the data and the example in order for us to understand exactly how you think that would create some type of a conflict.
Yeah, I am just pointing out that the optimization can limited to the risk can create many issues that are unforeseen in here because we haven't seen how this works in the real application and utilities decision making.
Okay, great, thanks. Yeah, Brian.
Yeah, just to piggyback a little bit on what Yumi's saying, just a concrete example are like battery backups for customers or community centers or other things that have very low BCRs, which we do calculate. but just to understand there may be a portfolio anchor on those activities if they're included in the foundational programs. Perhaps another way to think about this too is that, we've said this for quite a bit of time, that there could be, if you will, a z-axis on this. And trust me, I'm not recommending we have a different axis on this, but it could also be, other foundational activities that the commission forces us to do for good reasons, right? But they are not intended to be optimized in this way. And they can't really be teased out in the same manner. And I could say things like compliance trimming, right? So you have compliance vegetation management versus incremental vegetation management, right? So it would be really hard to tease that out. We could, and we have. But I just want to let you know that we're going to have to be cautious again when we present our risk. And I think this is what you're getting at. How we present these things. Is that correct?
I mean, it's definitely up to you guys to determine how you present the optimization of, your different mitigations. That's why we haven't used a very prescriptive approach here. And, I would just say that, and then also, of course, how you present it and the optimization approach that you use is open for, parties to make comment on. It's open for our evaluation as well. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Yeah, Henry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Can you go back to the slot one, to the curve slide, the efficient? It's like what I'm hearing from kind of like the last. I want to make sure I understand what I heard in the last two comments. It's like, so what I'm kind of hearing is imagine that portfolio 161 gets chosen, but there is a chance that something like an AMI would not provide any risk, additional risk reduction, but would cause additional costs. And so it essentially would shift this, if portfolio 161 is everything except for the AMIs, the portfolio 161 plus AMIs would basically shift the dot to the right and would shift it off the optimization, the efficient portfolio. And there's concern that shift could result in unintended consequences. Is that am I characterizing kind of the
That's
question
correct.
right? Yeah,
that's correct, Henry.
And I think to Eddie's point, I think that's definitely one reason why this ramp has a narrative portion, right? So that you can add in, here's our efficient frontier, or however you choose to optimize it, right? And then we have our optimal portfolio. Let's say we've decided to go with 161, but we want to add the AMIs in. That's 161A. It's not as efficient, but the reason why we chose this is because of X, Y, and Z. Eddie, correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not as in the weeds with the staff proposal as you are, but I very much think that was the way the staff proposal is written, and the way that the ramp more generally works is to allow this kind of discussion. And I think one of the benefits to this discussion is where we start to see benefits to this optimization approach, is we start to see visually what's there, and that narrative explanation can help clarify why we may choose to make a non-optimal decision. And I think it gives us an opportunity to kind of flesh that out. And I think it gives an opportunity, especially to a non-technical expert that can kind of understand, oh, this is kind of an optimized based on risk reduced mitigation cost. Oh, this is the best we can do with our numbers, but we think that there's some additional benefits here, and here's the narrative to justify that. And so I think this kind of helps start painting the picture to justify some of the items that you're speaking about, Yumi. At least that's the way I'm seeing it.
And I think there's another point to that, where if you're in your narrative section, you're making a justification that AMI has to be included, even though maybe it's not, the most optimal portfolio, but it is the most optimal. We would hope that it would at least be one of the most optimal portfolios with AMI included. it maybe isn't as optimal as if you had taken AMI out, but with it in, at least it's it's as close to the frontier with AMI in as possible. And then you've provided a narrative description about why that needs to be part of the calculus. And I think Henry's absolutely right, the way that he's framed this. So yeah. Was that good, Henry, or did you have one other thing you wanted to add?
No, thank you. That's all.
Okay, thanks. Wendy, I saw you had your hand up, but it came down. Did you want to add something?
No, I was going to ask further about the AMI.
Oh, okay.
So I guess maybe I will, just for clarification, Yumi. I just want to see if I'm understanding correctly. So you're saying that a new AMI system, particularly, would be a major new capital project, another possibly multi-billion-dollar project. And if you had, part of the benefits would be to detect faults and mitigate those faults rapidly enough to mitigate and reduce the risk of ignitions, is what I'm hearing you say. But then there's a lot of other benefits that are not captured in the RDF, like perhaps getting more accurate sales, how you're charging your customers more accurately and getting that income more accurately, or those costs covered. Is that what you're talking about, Yumi? I just wanted to be sure.
Yes, sort of. Yes, mostly. Maybe I shouldn't have brought up this example. I don't want to go that route, but I think that's an example that many programs might have, that there are risk reduction benefits as a smaller portion of the entire program, but there are other unquantifiable benefits that utilities do to allow future innovations, right? That's really hard to quantify, right? So that's what I was talking, and that in terms of if that contributes to the budget constraint, risk budget constraints, it can skew the result or less. So maybe one way is just take the cost out of the budget constraint and assume that is in the portfolio, and just include meaningful the programs that are whose primary focus is in reducing the risk. If that kind of flexibility will be allowed.
Okay, great. Let's see. I think Mark, you were next.
Well, Henry's point really hit home for me. Is it fair, Henry, to say that really the principal goal is to just consider a wider breadth of portfolios than has been, I guess, that you've seen so far, so that you have more to examine, and then whether or not some or all or one of those is more reasonable, there's room to qualitatively justify it. And I guess, I don't know if you believe me, but the degree to which you'll find that valuable is somewhat correlated with how many portfolios you have to look at, right? Like 250,000 portfolios, maybe it's a little bit more difficult, right? And it's 2 to the 8th. That's taking 8 mitigation programs and all their combinations. So I think, it's easy to sympathize with the goal of providing more options and, quantifying how, which of these makes more sense, and also wrapping some qualitative judgment around that. But if we take this too far, most of the quantification is going to be noise. And to the extent that we can add comments and narratives, further highlighting why we chose our ultimate decision, that might end up being like 99% of the story if all the quantification is just noise. And, on some level, this just goes back to Yumi's point that, we're a lot of us are quants, right? We love modeling, we love numbers, we would want to quantify everything that we can. It's just it's turtles all the way down, right? You can talk about estimate quality, you can talk about estimate quality of estimate quality. You know, at some point, the decision has to be made where common sense overrides purely what you get from the computer, and you know, that boundary, right, is where we have to strike the balance, and that might be more transparent with, you know, certainly with more portfolios, but like how many more?
I know that the question was directed at me. I have helped with this project. I'm mostly focused on wildfire mitigation, so I'm not sure that I'm really able to answer the big picture, that big picture question in the way like Eddie might be able to. So I might cede it to cede the response to Eddie. I mean, I can provide some perspective on this, but I think Eddie's probably a better person to talk to.
Yeah, let me give a first response, and then Henry, if you wanted to add, you're more than welcome to. I think, Mark, that the transparency point that you made there at the end, that I think I would argue that the reason that we're arguing that optimization needs to be part of the discussion is because we think it's going to increase transparency. We're currently, at least the approach that we've presented here today makes us feel confident that we're not going to be looking at 250,000 portfolios. And, we would recommend that the utility present to us, a number of portfolios that's optimal and manageable so that we can transparently understand what is the best way to reduce this risk. And so I think that, of course, the number of portfolios is, you can get a great deal of noise, but to be perfectly honest, it's kind of up to the utility. The ball is kind of in the utility's court. We're giving you that flexibility to tell us what that should look like, what the most optimal portfolio should be. And so I think that we hope that there's an honest effort taken to present to us what those optimal portfolios will be. So I'll leave it at that. Henry, did you want to add to that, or?
No, I think that you kind of said what I would have tried to have said if I had attempted to answer the question. Yeah.
Great. Mr. Mosher, would you like to add some comments to this?
Yeah, again, asking a question out of naivety, not directly related, but tangentially related to this conversation. How, if at all, is undepreciated rate base handled when we have mitigations proposed that take out of service plant that still has value on the book? Another way of saying it is how is sunk cost treated if it really isn't sunk cost because ratepayers are still paying for it into the future?
Mm-hmm. So my understanding is that when the utility estimates, and this is all hypothetical, but when the utility estimates this budget constraint of $585, I mean, they have unit costs that are associated with each mitigation, and that includes, any type of like net negative salvage value for certain types of assets that are finished appreciating but still have some type of recycling cost or some type of disposal cost. So I think that's one piece that gets added into that cost. As for the depreciation of an asset that gets replaced, that's still not completely depreciated, I think that's a good and open question. But my understanding is that in and it's probably wrong, but my understanding is that there's a true-up process within the GRC that addresses that remaining depreciation. And I'm not sure that it's necessarily integrated or addressed within the unit cost that's presented in the ramp. I think that that's something that's handled almost strictly within the GRC, because I believe that that's an RO model issue that kind of precedes some of these cost estimates that we're discussing within the ramp. Yeah, does that help answer your question? I don't believe that the ramp gets at that level of accuracy with cost.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, Russell.
I just wanted to weigh in quickly on the last issue that Mr. Mosher raised. So there has been a question in previous GRCs, and I'm not talking about an open GRC, just so we're clear.
Okay.
Where specifically in SC's 2021 GRC, there was an argument by certain parties that because SCE was proposing to proactively replace poles and wires pursuant to our covered conductor program, that the undepreciated value of the previously existing poles and wires should somehow be credited to customers. The commission thoroughly rejected that argument based on group depreciation principles that have been in place for decades. So hopefully that answers the question a little bit.
Okay, thank you, Russell. I appreciate that. Okay, Mr. Mosher, did you have something you wanted to add to that, or is that an old
No,
hand?
just forgot my hand up. Thanks, Eddie.
Okay, you know what? Let's see. Is there any additional questions? I could probably take one more, and then I think we're going to have to close this out after 3 full days. If there's no additional questions. Oh, someone come off mute.
Yeah. Hey, Eddie, this is Chris Vias with Edison.
Hi, Chris.
A couple of items that's maybe more related to next steps, but would appreciate before we close just to raise them. First of all, thank you to you and to all the parties for all the efforts over the last 3 days. It's much appreciated. There has been a lot of discussion and sort of deferral to written comments and suggestions for parties to put that in written comments. Can you clarify for us what use is going to be made of these comments? Like procedurally, you know, we have a set of opening or reply comments. What use is going to be made of them for purposes of trying to get this right for everybody?
The same way that the comments are always used. They inform a proposed decision.
Okay, so it would be proposed decision would be where any reaction to them would show up then. Okay.
And then there's additional opportunity for parties to comment on a proposed decision.
Right. Although those comments are then generally limited to trying to find errors in that proposed decision. I would just note that. Also, there is an outstanding request, a modest and unopposed one that the joint utilities made, supported by PCF, and nobody objected, to just have the reply comments, which are currently due the Monday after Thanksgiving, to have that just be moved a couple of days. Is there any sense of that we might get a ruling on that? I just want to be cognizant of people's schedule next week.
I can't speak to that directly, but yeah, I think the judge is aware of that, and he will make a ruling on that.
Okay.
Soon. Yeah.
And lastly, I would just note that I think, from my perspective, with all of the honest perspectives coming here, I think part of the challenge in trying to come to consensus is there is only one actor here that has the accountability and liability for running the system, and that's the utilities, of course, supervised by our regulator. And so, you know, I think we just have to keep in mind that while these issues are very complex, and in trying to get such a diverse group of parties to come to agreement or consensus on it, I just wanted to note, because we haven't noted it, I think, in these workshops, that only one party has accountability and liability, a franchise obligation to serve, and all of those things, and that is the utilities. Thanks, Eddie, and thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Chris. Okay, great. Unless there's another final comment to close us out, I will give us our next steps. So we're going to be receiving our workshop recordings for YouTube. They're going to be coming out in about 3 to 4 days. And so we'll be posting them both on our PUC YouTube channel. And then there's also going to be an update to the, oh, Tom, did you want me to pause for a minute? You wanted to add something?
Oh, I was going to comment on this after you finish speaking, if that's okay.
Okay, yeah, sure. Yeah, we're just gonna make some updates to our webpage. We'll post the YouTube link on our webpage, and I'll make sure to notify the service list when we get there, or when it gets there. Then, we're currently aiming for filing this post-workshop proposal for November 27th, so that's next Wednesday. Pending any discussion about extension, which it seemed like I heard that there was an interest in that in the workshop. So we will pay attention to that request if it comes. And the opening comments for workshop 2 would be on December 17th, and then the reply comments would be December 24th. And I think I'll wrap that up, at least for the next steps, and maybe I'll just mention one other thing after Tom finishes.
Thank you, Eddie. I just wanted to note, I know Joe Mitchell is talking about asking for an extension on the proposal deadline. I also think that the reply comment deadline seems challenging, to say the least, and maybe not best date. Particularly after, hearing everything in the workshop. I think the opening comments are going to be really important and informative, and may also be a fair amount that, Turn and others disagree with in what other people say, and vice versa. And I think there needs to be a meaningful opportunity to really work with those opening comments and respond to them in a thoughtful way. So I think that doesn't, and I know this is not the place to make that point, but I just thought I would throw that out there and let people know that that's something that we think needs to be adjusted in the schedule.
Okay, we will look forward to potentially receiving that request as well. Thanks, Tom. I appreciate that. Last note that we will have a final workshop for track 1 on December 18th for the RMR proposal. You'll be receiving notifications about that coming out. They'll be starting next week or the week after. I can't quite remember at this moment, but at any rate, there will be materials coming out very soon. So we will definitely be meeting up on December 18th. I'm also going to start issuing a kind of a procedural approach to track 2, just looking at how we want to structure the technical working groups for discussing the data templates. So that should also be coming out in December as well, early December. I just wanted to note that I fully understand that the risk tolerance topic is complicated. We knew that it would be complicated, and I think, though, that staff have worked diligently and quite hard with our colleagues at level 4 to come up with a proposal that we're excited that it's generated this much discussion. I don't know if anybody noticed, but I never once had to go to a discussion point slide. I think that that speaks to the interest in the topic, but also the fact that we were able to present it in a way that allows folks to at least ask questions and ask clarifying questions. And I appreciate that there's been kind of a mixture of like technical discussion as well as really important procedural discussion. I think that both of those are really key to making sure that whatever approach that the commission decides on with regard to risk tolerance, that it's done in a way that can be implemented in a productive manner. So we are looking forward to seeing the opening comments and the reply comments and any alternative proposals that come in. Yeah, we encourage everybody to stay engaged with this topic, and I'm really glad that we've stuck with the schedule and worked through this particular topic and the complexities with it. And yeah, we look forward to continuing the dialogue as it goes forward. So thanks, everybody. I really appreciate it. It's been 3 full days, although half days, whatever, but it's felt like 3 full days every time we've been in these. So I really appreciate everybody sticking with it and providing us full comments and dialogue. So we'll be in touch.
Thank
and
you.
happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Eddie.
Happy Thanksgiving.